Well, good evening. A blessing to be with you again tonight. And last night, if you were here, I spoke about apparitions. And again, all of these beautiful statues around your church, all of these places, they're really places of pilgrimage. Many people, they go and they visit Fatima or Guadalupe or La Salette or Akita. The list goes on. They go there as pilgrims. So tonight I would like to speak a little bit about pilgrimage. Not only because I've been a pilgrim to many of these Marian apparition sites, but also because I've been a pilgrim to many different shrines in the United States, Canada, and many other places as well. Pilgrimage or religious travel is something that's near and dear and important to me, and to others, they share that same interest. Some people have a desire to travel and to see the world, to see new places, to really encounter God's beauty throughout the entire world. But then there are some people too that are perfectly content where they are, that they don't go far from home, and if they do go a little bit from home, they always drive. The secretary at my school has never flown in her 60-plus years of life. She has no interest in flying and no interest in seeing some of these marvelous places that you or I have seen as pilgrims. In a sense, that's kind of the beauty of this space, this church, with all these little votive areas to the different titles, different apparitions of Our Lady. It's really how the story of, or how the Lourdes Grotto came to be. That as Mary appears in Lourdes, France, to St. Bernadette Soubirous, that as people began to go there on pilgrimage, and that was when you didn't fly, but you went on a boat, and some priests would go there from the United States. Maybe they were going to Rome, and they went from Rome to France, to the Pyrenees, to that little village. They wanted to share that experience of Lourdes and to tell the story of Lourdes, and that's why there are a lot of Lourdes grottos all throughout the world, throughout our country. In Detroit, Michigan, Assumption Grotto has a Lourdes Grotto, and it was precisely for that reason that back in the late 1800s or early 1900s, the pastor of that parish went to Lourdes and started telling people about it. They couldn't go, and so he built them a mini Lourdes right where they were. And so we might not get to Akita, Japan, or to Ecuador, to Quito, where Our Lady of Good Success is, but we can come before her image here and remember that message and trust our petition and pray our Ave, that before these statues here, it's as if we're there, that we wish to be spiritually transported there. Today, as I had some time here in San Francisco, it's my second time here, but really my first time exploring San Francisco. The last time was back in the centennial year of Fatima. I was invited to give a talk at a men's conference in Napa Valley, and so I flew into San Francisco and went over the Golden State Bridge to go get there, but didn't appreciate it or experience it. So today, had the opportunity to go to that little observation area where the park and all that is, and take that in for a few moments. Secular travel. There are things throughout the world that people want to see. Mount Rushmore, Yellowstone, New York, London, Buckingham Palace in London, to go to Paris and see the Eiffel Tower. There's lots of places that people like to or want to go to in that secular sense. But our religious visits, we call them pilgrimages. Really, the history of pilgrimage originates in the Holy Land. We could really say it began with Our Lady. That as Maria of Agreda and Anne Catherine Emmerich relate in their mystical biographies, Mary went back to the places of Christ's birth many times in her life. That during the hours after Good Friday, when Jesus was in the tomb, she went back to the places of the way of the cross, venerating the spots where Jesus' blood was shed. Anne Catherine Emmerich says that she made the Stations of the Cross almost every day of her life, and that when she went to Ephesus with John, that because she walked it so many times in Jerusalem, she knew the number of steps, and so she created the way of the cross, that little place in Ephesus where she resided at her holy house. And again, every day, remembering the passion of her Son. So I would say Mary was the first one to be a pilgrim, to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Pilgrimages to the Holy Land continued, and there's one, the name escapes me, Egregia maybe, Agerius. Forgive me for not getting it exactly right, but it recounts pilgrimage early on to the Holy Land. That during the time when it wasn't safe to go to the Holy Land, the Stations of the Cross were created as a way to become pilgrim spots in a parish church. So pilgrimage really originates from the Holy Land. Then pilgrimage became popular, especially in Spain, the El Camino de Santiago, to walk in the footsteps of St. James the Greater. And it begins any number of places. There's 3 origin points, I think. You could walk to Compostela. Again, many accounts, many people do it. Some do it just for this secular sense of being outside and nature, and others go on a pilgrimage like that to detach from the world and to grow closer to God and to pray daily and to pray in very intense ways. So there was the Camino de Santiago. Last night I mentioned the apparition of Our Lady of Walsingham to Rakeldis, England's Nazareth. Again, pilgrimage couldn't go to the Holy Land, so Mary has her home rebuilt in England. There became the Walsingham Way, people walking from different parts of England and arriving at England's Nazareth. There's also a way in Ireland. I believe it's the Wicklow Way, maybe, or takes you, I think, if I'm not mistaken, to Glendalough. So there are lots of walking pilgrimages, going on foot. That was the original sense. Today we're blessed. We can We can go on pilgrimage by driving, by flying, by getting on a bus. Any number of ways we could get there, not just by foot today. So walking pilgrimages. Again, that's really why I'm here, because of the Walk to Mary that begins in Wisconsin a number of years ago, from St. Joseph to Our Lady of Champion, and how now in California here you walk to Mary from this church to another. There's a walking pilgrimage, carrying your petitions, giving public witness in a sense, and experiencing God's grace at those holy places. Where I come from in Wisconsin, or where I was previously assigned as a pastor, was in a Belgian community, a Belgian settlement. Much like Adele Bryce, the Wisconsin visionary who was of Belgian ancestry, where I was assigned in a town called Brussels. It was the largest Belgian settlement outside of Brussels, Belgium. So a lot of immigrants settled in that area. One of the unique things about where I was stationed was that they had little roadside chapels, just a little chapel built alongside the road. It was a custom in Belgium that began, there's a hashtag, roadside chapels in Belgium or something like that, and you could see some of them. So when the immigrants come to America, they bring their custom of building chapels in gratitude for grace received, and they build them in their backyards or alongside the road. I really think it began many centuries ago, that in the country of Belgium they would put a statue of Mary in a tree. There are some stories and legends about this. But they would put the statue of Mary in the tree, and some little boy would come along one day and take the statue out of the tree, or maybe would find the statue on the ground, pick up the statue, and wouldn't be able to move. They would be struck, paralyzed in a sense. And then someone would come, they'd find them and put the statue back in the little niche in the tree, and everything would be well again. The child would be animated again and could walk. And so they built shrines on those locations. One of them is Notre Dame des Foix. One of them is Our Lady of Scherpenheuvel, or Notre Dame de Montaigu. So I think that's another sense of pilgrimage, and having these statues and shrines as a place of remembrance. Like I said, I've visited not only these Marian apparition sites, but devotional shrines to Mary. So there are different, types of shrines. The shrines that commemorate an apparition at the site of the apparition. There could be a shrine like, for example, in Chicago, there's Our Lady of Guadalupe in Des Plaines, or in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Our Lady of Guadalupe that Cardinal Burke had built about 2 decades ago now, I think. So it's kind of a shrine commemorating the apparition and allowing people to have a special spiritual connection to the place of apparition. Then there's devotional titles of Our Lady. So there could be the Shrine of the Seven Sorrows, like there is in Chicago, that people go to and pray and experience the Servite Church. There's a shrine in Boston to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. So different devotional titles apart from apparitions, but shrines to Mary that people have gone to, commemorating a devotion received many years ago. We have shrines dedicated to saints, sometimes in the place where the saint lived or died, and again, shrines that emerge out of someone's personal devotion. And so they construct a shrine, and people start coming and praying and invoking the intercession of that saint. Those shrines are numerous all throughout the world to different saints. Lots of different types of places you could go on pilgrimage. I'd like to share just a few of the insights that I've gained myself from pilgrimage. This is like the shameless plug. I wrote a travel memoir kind of along this lines called Places of Grace. And so these are just some of the lessons I learned along the way. The first lesson is that these shrines are places of grace, as that title of this book I wrote says. That they're places where God has heard and God has answered prayers. It's going to a shrine like Champion, Wisconsin, where Mary appeared in 1859, and seeing crutches and braces and you name it left there as a testimony. It's going to Guadalupe and seeing the little medallions, I forget the Spanish word for it, that they leave as a testament to an intention or a grace. Maybe it's called milagro for miracle or something. But there are lots of reminders that God has heard prayers. That in Detroit, Michigan, just a little while ago, a young girl had a brain tumor and went to the tomb of Blessed Solanus Casey, prayed at the tomb of Blessed Solanus for a miracle, and her brain tumor disappeared. They're places of grace. There are many stories of the saints and how their tombs are special places of grace. There's an Orthodox saint called Saint Nectorius. Supposedly, if you visit and ask for grace, sometimes you hear a knocking from Saint Nectorius. I know someone who experienced that. But there are places of grace, of powerful intercession. I might have said this last night, but one of my favorite things to say about Marian devotion is that it works. That people have asked Mary for prayers, they've received some sort of grace, sometimes a miracle, something that's instantaneous, that's long-lasting and unexplainable. They've asked Mary's prayers and they've received that grace. So a shrine is a place of grace where people go with a big faith, believing that nothing is impossible for God, leaving their petitions and entrusting them to the intercession of Mary or the saints in hopes of receiving that grace, that gift of God. There are some places, this is the second thing about shrines, there are some places that have a particular grace that is associated with that shrine. That everybody knows that if you have this intention, you go to this shrine in particular. If you had cancer, you would go to St. Peregrine's shrine, wherever that might be. You would ask for his prayers and intercession for the healing and deliverance from cancer. So a specific grace associated with a place. This is the case in St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest city in the United States, the site of the first Mass believed in the New World. And in St. Augustine, a Spanish shrine was built back in the 1600s to Our Lady of La Leche. In art, it's called Maria Lactans, but Our Lady of La Leche. The particular grace of this shrine of Our Lady of La Leche is the grace of fertility. The image of Our Lady sometimes takes people aback. If I post a picture from being there, sometimes I get some nasty comments. Because the image is Mary breastfeeding the child Jesus. This is the maternal function of Our Lady as mother, nourishing the Son of God with her milk. For me, I think those who kind of want to get rid of this image of Maria Lactans, of the nursing Madonna, think it's maybe we've deified Mary, and so we can't see her in this very human, maternal way. But it really emphasizes her motherhood. People have gone to the shrine of Our Lady of La Leche. They've prayed. Couples go there. And couples who have been told they could never have children will go and pray there before this image of Our Lady. They'll light their candle. And then, miraculously, they have a child and go on to form a family. Personally, I have baptized about half a dozen La Leche babies, couples who struggled to conceive or couples who had miscarriage after miscarriage. And finally, through the prayers of Our Lady of La Leche, they experienced that grace of conception and bringing a child to birth, or the gift of adoption they discover, they get approved. I go to St. Augustine, it's my favorite city. I go there once a year and I'll post on the internet. I'll pray for couples, send initials or whatever, and I'll get hundreds of names, and I'll read each one of those initials or names before the image of Our Lady of La Leche, and I can't tell you how many messages and emails I've received over the years that after praying a rosary for whoever, including them in my group of intentions, that they've conceived and had a child and have experienced the joy of parenthood. A shrine like Our Lady of La Leche has a specific grace that's attached to it. That grace is usually known by the people. It's very popular. You'll discover that as you go on pilgrimage, I'm sure. At each of the places we might visit, this is number 3, at each of the places, there's a grace that God has in store for us. A specific grace that we're able to name. And maybe it's the grace of something unexpected. It's not what we wanted or we're asking God for, but we come to identify a grace. It's really what I do in this travel memoir, Places of Grace, is I simply look at each place and what was the grace that I received? And so the grace that I receive at a place is going to be different than the grace someone else receives at the place. For example, when it comes to Our Lady of Champion, when I write about Our Lady of Champion, I write about the grace of saying yes. Not only because Adele continually gave her yes to God as a result of the apparition, but for me, the Shrine and Champion played a very pivotal role in my story of becoming a priest. I had entered the seminary right out of high school, and I left after just one semester. I was kind of embittered about it all. I never imagined or dreamed that I would go back to the seminary. I was working in politics and became dissatisfied one election night with the results and just kind of had this moment where I thought to myself, there must be something better, something greater in life than this. And priesthood came back. I decided to discern with a religious community, and I'd gone to a come and see and was in the process of application. But I kept visiting the shrine of Our Lady in Champion, and it was one day, I don't know what day it was, but as I was there, the responsorial psalm said, "Lord, this is the people that longs to see your face." It just hit me that as I looked out at those people, I knew many of them by name and knew their stories. I thought maybe these are the people that God was calling me to serve. So I put on hold the religious community and went back to seminary with the diocese. The shrine was the grace of saying yes for me. Someone else who goes to the shrine in Champion, they might experience a different grace, and sometimes I think about it and I think it could have a particular grace that's associated with it. That maybe there's the grace of conversion. That Mary, when she appeared there, she said, "I am the Queen of Heaven who prays for the conversion of sinners, and I wish you to do the same." And so I think people go there and they offer their Holy Communion for the conversion of sinners, and that's the grace that people are asking, and could be the singular grace associated, a particular grace for that shrine. Or it could be the grace of catechesis, that Mary tells Adele to gather the children and teach them what they need to know for salvation and how to approach the sacraments. And so that catechists would go there and they would pray and entrust their students. Every time I go to Champion, I pray for my religious education program. I beg Adele Bryce at her grave to help us. Not only to teach the children because parents aren't coming to Mass or whatever, but because for 2 years we really haven't been able to find a religious education coordinator, and so we kind of just put a ball in motion and let it go, and we're not serving the catechists or the students as best as we could. And so I beg Our Lady and I beg Adele, could be the grace of Champion, the grace of catechesis. But when we visit a shrine, it could be that the grace I receive will be different than the grace you receive. But grace is flowing and it's abundant. A shrine on a pilgrimage sometimes exists as a reminder of what God has done. That a shrine is a place of remembering God's intervention in the life of his people. In the state of Minnesota, there was this terrible, terrible grasshopper epidemic back in the, I think, 1870s or 1880s. It was so bad that this governor of the state of Minnesota declared a day of penance, prayer, and fasting so that the grasshoppers would leave. Because the grasshoppers were eating the crops and destroying the property and devastating their economy. So prayer by the government. There was a Benedictine monk named Father Boniface back then. And Father Boniface, he felt inspired. He took his parishioners and they went to the top of this hill and they took a statue of Our Lady and they prayed the rosary and they promised Our Lady that if the grasshoppers would go away, that this is the funny thing, that every year for 15 years or something like that, putting a limit, every week on Saturday for 15 years they would come to offer prayers and thanksgiving. Well, today a chapel stands there. They affectionately call it the Grasshopper Chapel. There's an image of Our Lady, and it has two grasshoppers that are flanking Our Lady, much like angels would. But this little chapel in this little town in Minnesota is a reminder that God heard these people's prayers. The Grasshopper Chapel was devastated by a tornado once, but they rebuilt it. And they still have the devotion to Our Lady of the Grasshoppers to this day. But many of these shrines are testaments to what God has done. That a shrine to Our Lady of the Rosary would probably recall Our Lady's victory, or the naval victory of Our Lady of Lepanto. It's reminding us that God heard the people who prayed the Rosary that day. So a shrine can communicate that story. I found in my religious pilgrimage that there are places that I will visit again and again. I've been a pilgrim to Lourdes half a dozen times. I need to go back soon. I feel it in my soul. But it's a place that I go back to again and again and again. That every time that I sit there at the grotto, it's like I'm in heaven. That time ceases to exist, that I'm able to pray in ways that I'm not able to pray when I'm back at home. And so it's almost as if I go there seeking that again and again. I think that's what happens, that maybe we find that regular place of pilgrimage that we go to, and maybe it's this church right here, that we come back again and again because maybe your conversion began here at Mass or in confession, and you keep coming back to rediscover that. But that we go back to these places sometimes because we know that God has something that He wants to keep doing and give us, and that we can receive the graces of that place over and over. I go to Champion so often. It's right in my backyard, but it's a place where I'll visit over and over and over for the rest of my life. It's convenient for me, but I know a couple from Chicago that comes up every week to visit the shrine in Champion. They should just build a home. There's a congressman from Florida who comes to the shrine in Champion, grateful for the grace of meeting his wife, and every year they come to visit, and they're naming their child Adele after the visionary. They keep going back because they're grateful for what they received. I've also found in my religious pilgrimages that there are places I'm happy I visited, but there's no need to rush back. May sound a little crazy. There's a little shrine in Michigan, and it's called the Cross in the Woods. Some good friends of mine who aren't Catholic had a great desire to go to the Cross in the Woods, and so we went. Probably I never would have went. I'm grateful I went, saw it, experienced it, but it's not a place that I know I have to go to often. Maybe every now and again, every 10, 20 years. But it's not a place I'll rush back to, but people that live there in that little area, maybe that's their little oasis, and that's the place that they'll visit again and again and again. The thing, too, about pilgrimage is that a holy encounter can be as simple as visiting your local church. Yes, we can go on pilgrimage to so many of these places throughout the world. There are bucket list items. But we can encounter God and we can seek the intercession of the saints right here in this church. When Blessed Carlo Acutis makes his home on the back wall there, people grow in devotion to him and visit his little shrine there. They'll come here for that. In the story of the life of St. Francis de Sales, he was afflicted with a deep depression in his youth. A great darkness enveloped him. Every day, St. Francis de Sales went to his parish church and prayed before a black Madonna image, known today as Our Lady of Deliverance. But every day he begged Our Lady that this darkness would leave him and that he would see the light at the end of that darkness. Through his daily visits to Our Lady, St. Francis de Sales was delivered, becomes a priest and a bishop, a great spiritual writer whose treatises are still important and significant today, all because he kept going back to Our Lady in his parish church. When I was at the parish in Brussels, Wisconsin, there was a statue of Our Lady. I very much liked the statue. I found myself praying in front of it often. There was a gentleman who, where I was, it was like in a touristy area, and so he would be driving to one of the touristy destinations, and he said he always would stop and pray a rosary before the statue in our church because there was something that drew him to that image of Our Lady. And so in our churches, there are images that we might be drawn to, that we'll pray before, that we'll experience powerful intercession and graces that will bring some of the most difficult things in our life and pray in that spot, asking Mary or the saints to bring the petition to the Lord so that we would receive that grace. I've also learned, too, that when it comes to religious travel, that sometimes you'll be disappointed. Again, not the chirpy reality of pilgrimage, but I think sometimes when it comes to a place, we can build it up in our mind. We have this strong desire to go there, maybe sight unseen, but you have a great devotion to this saint, and you found out there's a little shrine to this saint. And so you go, and you experience a profound grace. Well, you receive a grace there, but maybe you go and you're disappointed. Sometimes, I do an annual bus trip, just in the Midwest usually, from my parish. My former parishioners and current parishioners, we get together and get on a bus and go to some holy sites and see some things. We were going to Chicago one year, and one of my parishioners said to me, "We have to go to the shrine to St. Jude. It's run by the Claretian missionaries." I had been to the shrine, and I told her, I said, "Well, you prepare to be disappointed, but we'll go." And so we went to that shrine, and it wasn't everything she thought it was. She had been giving money to that shrine every year. She wasn't disappointed in giving that money, but it wasn't what she thought it was going to be. It was a little side altar that had a statue of St. Jude, and Then they had this little votive chapel that had a very modern image of St. Jude, and she was a little disappointed. But she realized how much they needed their money because it was in a rundown part of Chicago, that they were serving some of the poorest of the poor in Chicago, and she realized that, well, they need my money. I need to keep supporting their mission. That shrine of St. Jude began during World War II when this Claretian father started praying a novena, a perpetual novena to St. Jude with his parishioners. It grew out of the devotion of the parish priest, and that's how it came about. Could be disappointed, but the reality when you visit a place like that is God's still doing something, and St. Jude is still interceding, and his relic is there, and you can really experience the power of his presence, even if the church might be a little disappointing. In religious pilgrimage, too, you could be surprised. I went to school in Chicago, so that's why there's a lot of Chicago references, but when I was down there at seminary, I was told about the Mother Cabrini Shrine. And my recollection of the Mother Cabrini Shrine from someone telling me was that it was in the basement of a hospital and that it wasn't worth visiting. So all my life I thought that, from the time I heard that in seminary to 8 years later or whatever. Well, a good author friend of mine, Susan Tassoni, called me one day and she said, "It's a Jubilee year for Mother Cabrini, and you need to interview the rector of this shrine, and you need to tell people about the shrine of Mother Cabrini." I told her, I said, well, I was told that it's very unimpressive, that it's not, like it's in the basement of a hospital or something. And she said, no, that's farthest from the truth. So I go to Lakeshore Drive and go to Mother Cabrini's shrine for the first time. She died there in Chicago. They have a room set up, maybe a replica, or maybe it's the actual room, I don't know. But I'll tell you, it was one of the most beautiful shrines to the saints that I've ever seen. It's in an old hospital, yes, but it's not a hospital anymore. Its entrance looks like a hotel lobby entrance, but once you go inside, you see this marvel of a chapel that tells the story of Mother Cabrini. To me, the best shrine is the shrine that can tell you about itself, that you could read the shrine and you can understand everything you need to know. And so you can be surprised. I never expected Mother Cabrini's shrine would become one that I would go back to anytime I'm in Chicago. That one time when I went there, I ended up getting rear-ended in an accident, but that won't stop me from going in the future. But a powerful place. I never thought I would fall in love with her story, but that shrine made me. So you can be surprised. And sometimes in religious pilgrimage, when you go to a place like that surprises you, maybe you're, go to Europe, there's lots of shrines, go to Rome and mosey on into an unexpected church, and maybe you'll find something that is so powerful, surprising to you, leaves an impression forever in your life. There are shrines, yes, but another place of pilgrimage that I would highly recommend are the graves of holy men and women. I've had some of the most powerful experiences of prayer and graces received when praying at the grave of a holy man or woman, some venerable or servant of God, a blessed, even saints. There's two that really stand out in my mind. The one is Venerable Samuel Mazzucchelli, a priest friend wanted to go to his grave, and I said, well, I've always wanted to go. I'll tag along. It was in the southwestern part of Wisconsin. Father Mazzucchelli was an early Dominican missionary. He's just buried in a parish cemetery, buried next to the order of sisters that he founded, the Cincinnati Dominicans. But we went to that grave, and it was a very powerful moment of prayer. And I remember leaving, we were driving back, and something just seemed different because I prayed at that grave of that holy person. He's a venerable, maybe could be a saint one day. He's on the way. Where I live kind of in the northwestern, I live in the northwestern part of my diocese, maybe not the state, but when I drive to like Madison or someplace, I take these backcountry roads. You take a left off the highway, take that for 10 miles, take a right, and eventually I get to an interstate. And there's a church, or there's a cemetery rather. There's an old church that's been alienated, that's no longer a church, and it's a sad state of affairs, if you ask me. But in this cemetery, in a little village called Ellis, Wisconsin, a blessed of the Catholic Church is buried in an unassuming grave next to his parents. Beatified maybe 2018, 2019, relatively new. Could be a saint. I don't know where they'll build his shrine if they do. But the grave of Blessed James Miller, that's his name. Blessed James Miller, like Blessed Stanley Rother, was a missionary to Guatemala. They were in different parts. James Miller was in Huehuetenango, and he was a Christian brother, not a priest. He fell in love with the Spanish language. A farm boy from Wisconsin, learned Spanish, felt really called to minister in Spanish. He was a teacher. They send him to Nicaragua, and then he has to come back because of the violence in the country. He's unhappy in America, and he begs to go to Guatemala, to where the Christian Brothers had a school. They send him there, and one day he's out fixing a window or painting the school or something, and he's shot dead out of hatred for the faith, for being a Christian teaching the Indian children in Guatemala. And so he's a blessed. When I pass by, I always stop and I always pray whatever the next hour of my breviary is. Daytime prayer, evening prayer. And I'll pray it there, knowing that Blessed Miller prayed the breviary himself, and I ask him to pray it along with me. But it's been a place I never would have suspected it, but I found out he was buried there, and it just seems like the right thing to do, to stop and say hello to this blessed. And been reading a biography about him and really impressed by the guy. I knew nothing about him, but he's become a good saintly friend and intercessor. There are probably graves of holy men and women nearby that you could pray at, or you go in search of as you travel. Because that's the thing, when you go on a vacation, a holiday, maybe look for these places to visit. That if you're going to go to Orlando, Florida, not only could you drive 2 hours to go to St. Augustine and visit Our Lady of La Leche, but you could go to the Basilica of Our Lady, Queen of the Universe. a large church that was built really to service all the Catholics that come to Disneyland, right? So, no, Disney World, whichever one it is. So, but that church has some of the most stunning stained glass windows I've ever seen. Has this beautiful devotional area to St. Joseph. Now, when you go and you travel, wherever you might go, you can search for some of these places, that you can find them, some of them off the beaten path, to maybe search for the religious shrine near you, wherever you're traveling to. When I was in Nashville one time, I looked up shrines, and I went to this little shrine to Our Lady of Bonneau. It was a place where you're driving and you get off, and if you meet another car, you don't know what's going to happen because it's only made for one car. It's really in the middle of nowhere. But I went there, I read the story, priest wanting to share the story of Bonneau, and their church built this little shrine in this out of the way place. So to search, find the place you could visit, maybe learn about the place you'll be visiting. So many people go on a pilgrimage and they'll miss some of the great things. In Wisconsin, there's Holy Hill, the Basilica Shrine of Mary Help of Christians. People go up to the third level. It's a beautiful basilica church. They missed the second level, where the stained glass windows tell the life of St. Therese of Lisieux. Powerful. Someone came once to the shrine of St. Joseph in De Pere, Wisconsin. It's a disappointing shrine. It's a humble shrine for St. Joseph. I said, well, did you go to the little oratory? They had no idea that's where the papally crowned statue of St. Joseph was. They only went into the church, looked at the stained glass windows, and saw a statue of St. Joseph in the church. So sometimes, if we don't study beforehand, look things up, we might miss the very important things. I went to Walsingham a few years ago now. When I went there, I knew nothing about it. I knew that there was a Catholic shrine and a Protestant shrine. I thought the two were across the street from each other. That's not true. I had an image of Our Lady in mind, that she was seated on a throne or something like that, but I didn't know anything. I didn't know it was England's Nazareth. My friend, a priest friend that I was traveling with, I told him, I said, I don't want to learn anything about it. I just want to go and experience and see if I can come to know the story of Walsingham just by visiting there. Did a good job communicating the story of England's Nazareth from the shrine there. Then I found out about the Catholic shrine. I visited the Protestant shrine, the Anglican shrine, that really you could be confused and think it's Catholic. But the Slipper Chapel is another shrine for Walsingham, and I didn't know what it was, and I came up with crazy, off-the-wall explanations to my friend. Well, maybe Our Lady left her slipper from the apparition. It's enshrined in the church. No. People left their shoes at the Slipper Chapel. It was a votive chapel built by this pious woman. And then they would walk the rest of the way to Mary's house, to England's Nazareth. So I learned these things by going there. When you go on a religious pilgrimage, you'll do so by preparing through prayer, maybe praying a novena beforehand. And then as you go there, you should take it in. You should appreciate it. Just today, I went to the Mission Dolores, and as I was visiting, prayed a decade of the Rosary, so prayer should be a part of any visit to a religious shrine. To take it in and to see everything and appreciate it. So often, especially in our technology-aged social media world, we go to a place and it's all about the picture. I took my share of pictures today. But I prayed too, and I appreciated these things. But when I was in the cathedral in Canterbury, where Thomas Becket was martyred, and I saw all these people walking by and taking a picture because they don't know what it is, but obviously this is a special place, so they take their picture and they go on without even remembering that Thomas of Canterbury was martyred there. That you go to Lourdes, and one time as I was sitting there at the grotto, I wondered what it must have been like when there were no cell phones. That you just sat there with Our Lady and you prayed, you looking up at the image. Not to just view it through the lens of the camera, but to really appreciate it with the lens of our eyes, with the eyes of our soul, and to spend time in prayer. Maybe some visits are quick, maybe others are prolonged. When I was in Walsingham, my priest friend was kind of left an impression on me. They had the Stations of the Cross, and he wanted to pray the Stations. It was like a Sunday. But he wanted to pray there, and it made sense. So to spend time in prayer, to really view the pilgrimage as a deepening of our relationship and friendship with the Lord. There are many notable people who went on pilgrimage, like Fulton Sheen, who went to Lourdes and didn't have money to pay the hotel bill, but kept begging Our Lady to pay the bill for him. And this one person comes up to him and asks him to be the translator of their trip to Paris. Then the wealthy man asks Fulton Sheen, "Have you paid your hotel bill yet?" But he went to Lourdes so many times, and to Fatima. He was a pilgrim. Mother Angelica, she went to Lourdes at the end of her life. They chartered a plane and took this cloistered nun. She had a great desire to go to Akita, Japan. She had heard the story of Sister Agnes, and so they took her in her hospital bed to Akita, Japan, so that she could pray there. Mother Angelica, she was a pilgrim. Cardinal George, before he died, went to Lourdes in hope of healing. Celebrated Mass at Champion on August 15th. He was a pilgrim. We're pilgrims. Pilgrims on the way to the kingdom of heaven, and some of these special spots are places we go along the way, where heaven has come to earth, or where our prayers can reach heaven in a special way when we visit these holy places. Shrines to Our Lady or to the saints truly are places of grace. I hope that you'll keep going on pilgrimage, even if it's just to each one of these little shrines. That you'll discover your place, that you keep going back to again and again. That you'll receive that unexpected or that surprising grace that God has in store for you when you take that leap and step of faith and go on pilgrimage to the many holy sites in our country and in our world. Thank you so much for the opportunity again to be with you tonight and last night to share these words about pilgrimage. I'd be happy to talk with people afterwards, kind of by the little bookstore area, I guess, again. I have a few copies of some books I wrote if you're interested. How They Love Mary and Places of Grace I brought. I only brought 5 copies of each. So anyways, thanks so much again. And you have a very beautiful church, beautiful spirituality as a parish. So God reward and God love each one of you.